Imagine the scene unfolding. It is the month of March in 1943, and Lieutenant James Howard is peering intently from the confines of his B-17 bomber, suspended at an altitude of 23,000 feet above the contested skies of occupied France. His dedicated crew has just endured an arduous 8-hour journey, battling frigid temperatures, and skillfully evading relentless German fighter aircraft, all in pursuit of a critical ball-bearing factory situated in the vicinity of Paris. With a surge of conviction, the bombardier's voice cuts through the intercom, declaring, "Bombs away!" A mere 30 seconds later, Howard, observing through his binoculars, witnesses the entirety of their destructive payload, a formidable array of 12 500-pound bombs, detonating innocuously in a verdant wheat field, a full half-mile distant from their intended objective. Their disheartening experience was far from unique. On that particular day, out of the 228 bombers comprising his formidable formation, a mere 19 managed to strike anything even remotely approximating their designated target. This translated into a meager 8% success rate, a figure that, astonishingly, was then regarded as a rather commendable achievement. The stark reality of American strategic bombing operations during the nascent stages of World War II was undeniably brutal, a truth that many preferred to keep shrouded in silence. Meanwhile, in the hallowed halls of Washington, high-ranking generals confidently assured Congress that the precise application of daylight bombing tactics would ultimately secure victory in the ongoing conflict. They presented meticulously prepared charts, sophisticated models, and an unwavering sense of conviction. However, over the embattled landscapes of Europe, aircrews were rapidly confronting a grim and undeniable truth: the act of deploying ordnance from an altitude of 4 miles while hurtling through the air at 180 miles per hour, all while simultaneously fending off aggressive fighter attacks and navigating through the incessant explosions of anti-aircraft fire, rendered any semblance of accuracy virtually unattainable. The Army Air Forces had meticulously calculated that a circular error probable, CP, of approximately 1,000 feet would be requisite for the effective obliteration of industrial targets. In simpler terms, this implied that at least half of the bombs released needed to impact within a 1,000-foot radius of the designated aiming point. This objective, on paper, appeared entirely reasonable. Yet, the reality proved to be quite the opposite. By the summer of 1943, the actual CP for missions undertaken by the 8th Air Force consistently hovered around a staggering 3,200 feet. Certain missions, regrettably, yielded even more abysmal results. During the inaugural Schweinfurt raid in August 1943, an impressive 724 tons of high explosives were unleashed upon the ball-bearing factories responsible for supplying a critical 40% of Germany's total production capacity. Subsequent post-mission reconnaissance, however, revealed a disheartening fact: less than 200 tons of that immense payload actually impacted within the confines of the factory complex. The overwhelming remainder scarred residential neighborhoods, churned up agricultural fields, and even indiscriminately cratered a venerable medieval church located a full 3 miles away. A staggering 60 bombers were tragically shot down on that fateful day, resulting in the loss or capture of 600 brave airmen, and the targeted factories were, astonishingly, restored to full operational capacity within a mere 6 weeks. Crews began to facetiously dub their bombing strategy the aluminum cloud approach, a descriptor that aptly captured the essence of their predicament. This method essentially involved flying in tightly coordinated formations, placing their collective faith in the lead bombardier's assumed expertise. When he released his bombs, every other aircraft would immediately follow suit, toggling their own payloads. The underlying theory posited that even if individual bombs scattered Somewhat erratically, the sheer volume of explosives would, by overwhelming force, incapacitate the target. However, German factories were not gargantuan, sprawling complexes. A typical synthetic oil plant, for instance, might encompass a respectable 40 acres. This figure seems substantial until one confronts the sobering realization that, given an accuracy rate of 3,000 feet, the bomb pattern would inevitably spread across an immense area of 300 acres. This tactic amounted to little more than indiscriminate carpet bombing, coupled with a desperate prayer that some vital component would be struck. The profound human cost only served to exacerbate the grim situation. Each and every mission demanded that 10-man crews navigate through veritable walls of flak, those ominous black puffs of 88mm shells possessing the terrifying capability to shred a bomber's robust aluminum skin as if it were mere tissue paper. Crew survival rates throughout 1943 were undeniably horrifying. Statistically speaking, a bomber crew faced a harrowing 1 in 4 chance of successfully completing their mandatory 25 missions. And for what ultimate purpose? To witness their precious bombs vanish into impenetrable cloud cover, or, even more agonizingly, to observe them impact and realize that they had just obliterated a residential block, while the vital factory next door continued its operations unimpeded. Morale was plummeting at a rate even more precipitous than the bombing campaign itself. The Norden bomb site was heralded as the revolutionary device poised to fundamentally alter the dynamics of aerial warfare. Should one ever ponder the perplexing question of why American bombers steadfastly persisted in undertaking perilous daylight missions, while their British counterparts sagaciously transitioned to night bombing, the Norden provides the definitive explanation. This intricate apparatus, officially designated the Mark 15 Norden bomb site, was essentially a sophisticated mechanical analog computer, weighing a substantial 50 pounds and commanding a staggering price of $8,000 per unit in 1943, an amount exceeding the cost of most residential properties at the time. The Army Air Forces harbored such an intense preoccupation with this particular device that they allocated an astonishing $1.5 billion towards its development and production, thereby establishing it as one of America's most exorbitantly priced weapons programs. For the sake of contextualization, the entirety of the monumental Manhattan Project, responsible for the atomic bomb, cost approximately $2 billion. Carl L. Norden, an ingenious Swiss engineer working diligently in New York, had conceived this optical computing marvel during the 1920s, basing it upon a truly brilliant conceptual framework. The bombardier would recline in the aircraft's nose, peer through the bomb site's precise eyepiece, and meticulously track the target manually, while the bomb site itself autonomously computed critical variables such as wind drift, altitude, airspeed, and the projected trajectory. Herein lay the device's remarkable sophistication. The bomb site was ingeniously integrated and wired directly into the aircraft's autopilot system. During the critical bombing run, the bombardier possessed the capability to execute minute adjustments using a dedicated control panel, and the bomb site would, remarkably, physically steer the airplane to compensate for any wind-induced drift. In theory, this promised an almost unbelievable degree of pickle-barrel accuracy. Army demonstrations frequently showcased bombardiers successfully dropping practice bombs into precisely delineated 100-foot circles from an altitude of 20,000 feet. Promotional materials, in a bold display of confidence, literally asserted that one could accurately drop a bomb into a pickle barrel from a distance of 4 miles up. The security protocols surrounding the Norden bomb sites were characterized by an almost pathological paranoia. Bombardiers were required to take a solemn oath, distinct and separate from their standard military oath, pledging never to divulge any information whatsoever concerning the device. Prior to each mission, an armed guard would meticulously transport the bomb site to the aircraft, securely encased within a locked container. In the dire event of a bomber being shot down, the bombardier's explicit and unyielding orders were to utterly destroy the site using a thermite grenade before attempting to parachute to safety. Tragically, several bombardiers actually perished in their valiant attempts to adhere to these stringent orders, remaining with their burning aircraft for extended, perilous durations while desperately striving to melt their Norden bomb sites. The military genuinely believed that if this invaluable technology fell into German hands, they would swiftly replicate it, and America's strategic advantage would, in their estimation, vanish instantaneously. Herein lies the crushing irony of the situation. The Germans were already privy to Norden's closely guarded secrets and, remarkably, harbored no particular interest in them. A German spy named Hermann Lang had successfully pilfered the blueprints as early as 1938, and German engineers, upon reviewing them, merely shrugged their shoulders and reverted to their own indigenous Lotferrohr 7 bomb site design. The crucial question is, why? Because they had already independently deduced what American aircrews were about to discover through bitter experience. The Norden's vaunted precision was entirely theoretical. It predicated its accuracy on the unrealistic assumptions of unlimited time over the target, an absence of defensive fire, perfect visibility conditions, and stable atmospheric air. Combat operations over the unforgiving European theater offered precisely none of these ideal circumstances. The initial and most immediate reality check emanated from the targets themselves. German factory complexes were not defenseless targets situated in wide-open fields. They were equipped with sophisticated smoke generators capable of blanketing entire industrial zones within a mere 5 minutes of an alarm being sounded. By late 1943, German defensive doctrine mandated that every major strategic target possess sufficient smoke-generating capacity to effectively obscure visibility for a full 30 minutes. Bombardiers would meticulously spend the entire approach phase clearly observing their target. Then, at the most critical juncture, with an abrupt poof, the objective would vanish beneath an impenetrable shroud of artificial fog. At this point, the bombardier was reduced to mere guesswork, and the highly advanced Norden bomb site was utterly incapable of computing a best guess. Then, there was the brutal reality of combat itself. The Norden required a perfectly straight, level bombing run of at least 3 minutes to accurately calculate its trajectory. 3 minutes of flying straight and level over hostile German territory translated directly into 3 minutes of being a highly predictable and vulnerable target for every anti-aircraft gun positioned below. Pilots quickly ascertained that evasive maneuvers were paramount for survival, but such actions rendered the Norden bomb site completely ineffective. The intricate device simply could not compensate for sudden changes in altitude or sharp, defensive turns. Consequently, aircrews were confronted with an impossible dilemma: fly a steady course and face almost certain death, or execute evasive maneuvers and inevitably miss the target. German flak gunners were not merely firing at American bombers. They were engaged in an industrial-scale execution. By 1943, Germany had meticulously constructed the most sophisticated anti-aircraft defense network in the annals of human history, and it was systematically and brutally decimating the 8th Air Force. The formidable backbone of this elaborate defensive system was the notorious 88mm flak gun, formerly known as the Flak 18/36/37, depending on its specific variant. One might have heard of the 88mm primarily as a formidable tank killer, and indeed it was, but its fundamental and most critical function was the systematic destruction of bombers. Germany manufactured an approximate total of 21,000 of these devastating guns throughout the duration of the war, and roughly 10,000 of them were strategically positioned, forming an impenetrable ring around vital targets across occupied Europe. What rendered the 88mm so utterly terrifying was its lethal capabilities. It possessed the power to propel a 20-pound high-explosive shell to altitudes of up to 32,000 feet, at an astonishing rate of 15 to 20 rounds per minute. Each shell was meticulously fitted with a time delay fuse, which German crews would manually calibrate based on the bomber's ascertained altitude. The shell would then ascend, reach its predetermined height, and detonate into a lethal shower of thousands of razor-sharp fragments, traveling at supersonic velocities. A solitary fragment, no larger than one's thumb, possessed the devastating potential to pierce through an aircraft's aluminum skin, sever crucial control cables, rupture vital fuel tanks, or instantly kill a crew member. And German gunners were not firing these deadly projectiles one at a time. They were unleashing them in coordinated batteries. A typical German industrial target, such as those found in the heavily industrialized Ruhr Valley, would be defended by 40 to 60 heavy flak guns, strategically positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire. Sophisticated fire control radar systems, such as the Würzburg system, were capable of tracking bomber formations from distances of 40 miles out, continuously feeding vital data to mechanical gun calculators. The Germans, in an impressive display of engineering prowess, literally employed mechanical computers at each battery, which would rapidly crunch altitude, speed, and heading data, subsequently spitting out precise firing solutions. This advanced capability allowed crews to accurately set their fuses and commence firing before American bombers even caught sight of their intended target. German anti-aircraft batteries would commence their furious barrage even before American bomber formations could visually identify their designated objectives. During a major aerial assault, hundreds of formidable guns would unleash thousands of explosive shells into the firmament, effectively transforming vast expanses of the sky into what bomber crews chillingly dubbed flak fields, sections of atmosphere rendered impenetrably dark by the incessant, violent detonations. The calculus of survival was stark and unforgiving. Traversing areas of intense anti-aircraft fire at an altitude of 18,000 feet placed an aircraft squarely within the optimal engagement zone, where German artillery exhibited its highest degree of lethal precision. At this perilous elevation, aircrews frequently recounted instances where the density of exploding flak bursts was so profound that it became impossible to discern anything beyond the immediate, shattering concussions. The auditory experience for those trapped within this aerial maelstrom was akin to being sealed inside a colossal metal drum, relentlessly pounded by myriad hammers. Survivors of these harrowing ordeals vividly described a ceaseless, rumbling thunder, punctuated by the sharp, metallic ping of shrapnel violently impacting the aircraft's fuselage, a constant testament to their precarious existence. A poignant entry from the diary of navigator John Morris, serving with the 301st Bomb Group, following a mission targeting Bremen, underscored the grim reality. Counted 127 holes in our ship. Don't know how we made it. Jenkins bled out in the waist before we crossed the channel. He was 19. This stark account encapsulated the devastating human cost and the sheer improbability of return from such missions. In response to these dire circumstances, American strategic planners adopted what appeared to be a rational and imperative course of action: ascend to higher altitudes. By the middle of 1943, bomber formations had routinely elevated their operational ceilings to between 25,000 and 27,000 feet, occasionally venturing as high as 30,000 feet. At these extreme heights, they believed themselves to be beyond the predominant effective range of enemy flak, and German fighter aircraft, too, struggled with diminished performance in the rarefied atmosphere. The unforeseen complication, however, emerged from these very elevations. At 25,000 feet, the ambient air temperature plummeted to a brutal minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and the atmosphere grew so thin that even aircraft equipped with supercharged engines experienced a marked degradation in performance. Crews were compelled to rely on heated flight suits and supplementary oxygen masks merely for their continued existence. Yet, the most insidious consequence of operating at such lofty heights was the profound detriment to bombing accuracy. The vaunted Norden bombsight, once heralded for its promise of pickle-barrel precision even at 25,000 feet, found its capabilities severely compromised. Every variable that had complicated bombing at 18,000 feet became exponentially more challenging. High-altitude wind speeds were not the moderate 20 or 30 miles per hour encountered at lower levels. They frequently soared to 80, 100, and sometimes even 120 miles per hour. The existence of jet streams was not yet understood, leaving crews bewildered as they observed their dropped bombs drifting laterally for miles. Visibility, too, proved consistently unreliable. What appeared as wispy, insubstantial clouds from above often completely obscured targets below. Furthermore, temperature inversions generated distinct atmospheric layers that refracted light, rendering precise optical sighting virtually impossible. The groundbreaking offset bombing technique was not a product of deliberate design or strategic foresight. Rather, it emerged from a crucible of desperation, navigational confusion, and one navigator's pivotal error. During the fateful Schweinfurt raid in October 1943, this second major assault on Schweinfurt's critical ball-bearing factories was already unfolding as an unmitigated catastrophe. Of the 291 bombers launched, a staggering 60 were shot down, and an additional 17 sustained such catastrophic damage that they were permanently grounded. This represented an appalling 26% loss rate from a single, brutal mission. Yet, concealed within the voluminous post-mission reports was an anomaly of profound significance. One particular unit, the 305th Bomb Group, had inadvertently approached its initial point, the critical juncture where the final bombing run commences, from an incorrect vector. Instead of executing the pre-planned north-to-south attack, they had advanced from the northeast, establishing a trajectory roughly 40 degrees askew from the target. Their navigator, Captain Robert Williams, had made a critical miscalculation in wind correction during the intricate approach phase. By the time the lead pilot recognized their deviation from the intended course, the formation was irrevocably committed. Pivoting a tight echelon of 18 heavy bombers on a dime, especially amidst a swirling vortex of German fighter attacks, was simply not feasible. Consequently, Williams made a crucial, on-the-spot tactical decision. He instructed his bombardier, Lieutenant Charles Murphy, to utilize the crosswind correction mechanisms on the Norden site, but with a radical twist, to deliberately displace the aiming point to the right of the factory complex. In essence, instead of directly targeting the facility and allowing the bomb site to mechanically account for drift, Murphy was directed to aim at an unoccupied space adjacent to the target, trusting the prevailing winds to guide the released ordnance back into the intended area. The empirical evidence of this unconventional maneuver was captured unequivocally by the strike cameras mounted on every bomber. While most other groups participating in the raid that day achieved their typical hit rate, languishing between 8 and 12%, the 305th's bombs meticulously walked directly through the very heart of the factory complex. A remarkable 42% of their total ordnance successfully impacted within the designated target area. Initially, analytical staff dismissed this extraordinary outcome as a mere stroke of fortune, a random statistical anomaly. However, Williams adamantly maintained that the success was far from coincidental, asserting he possessed the mathematical rationale to substantiate his claim. He explained that the Norden bombsight operated under a fundamental design premise that was proving fatal to accuracy at high altitudes. It erroneously presupposed that an aircraft would be flying directly toward its target, with wind forces acting either as a headwind, slowing progress, or a tailwind, accelerating it. The bombsight's drift compensation was specifically calibrated for these direct axial wind components. Yet, at 25,000 feet over Germany, the atmospheric winds were almost never perfectly aligned with a bombing run. Instead, they predominantly originated from the side, exerting a lateral force that continuously pushed the entire aircraft sideways through the air. This lateral wind component induced a phenomenon known as crab angle. To maintain a straight ground track, the aircraft's nose would be pointed slightly into the wind, much like a person leaning into a strong side wind to walk a straight path. The critical flaw arose when bombs were released from an aircraft flying in a crab angle. They inherited both the forward velocity of the aircraft and its lateral drift. While the Norden could accurately compute the forward trajectory, its lateral drift compensation was predicated on the assumption that the aircraft was maintaining a heading directly at the target. When this assumption was violated, when the aircraft was crabbing into a crosswind, the bombsight's calculations deviated by hundreds of feet. The stronger the crosswind, the more pronounced this error became, and at 25,000 feet, powerful crosswinds were an omnipresent reality. Williams's serendipitous discovery was deceptively simple yet profoundly revolutionary. His insight revealed that by deliberately approaching the target at an angle relative to the anticipated wind direction and concurrently offsetting the aim point perpendicular to the aircraft's flight path, the prevailing crosswind could be ingeniously harnessed to guide the bombs precisely onto the target. Instead of futilely battling against the wind's lateral influence, the strategy effectively weaponized it. The bombardier would first identify a recognizable reference point, perhaps a road intersection, a distinctive river bend, or a prominent building, situated precisely crosswind from the actual primary target. He would then meticulously aim the Norden sight at this chosen reference point. As the bombs commenced their 4-mile descent through the atmosphere, the relentless crosswind would exert its predictable force, nudging them laterally from the reference point's trajectory onto the true objective. The brilliance of this method lay in its elegant geometry. At an optimal offset angle of 40 to 50 degrees, the wind performed the bulk of the work. The bombs would drift with remarkable predictability, and because this lateral drift was meticulously factored into the initial aiming, the resulting dispersion pattern tightened dramatically. Instead of ordnance scattering in an elongated oval along the aircraft's flight path, they would track sideways in a concentrated, precise line. It was an inherently counterintuitive approach. One was deliberately aiming away from the desired impact zone, yet the underlying physics proved incontrovertible. While the mathematical principles underpinning offset bombing were not overly intricate, they necessitated a complete reevaluation of how bombardiers approached their task. Traditional bombing doctrine had dictated, aim directly at the target and allow the Norden to compute all other variables. Offset bombing, conversely, instructed, for a moment, disregard the target's existence. Concentrate instead on the wind triangle. Every bombardier had been introduced to the concept of wind triangles during their navigation schooling, but for most, these remained theoretical exercises. Now, these very triangles represented the critical distinction between successfully neutralizing a factory and inadvertently obliterating a hospital 3 blocks distant. To illustrate the mechanics of this calculation, consider a scenario. An aircraft flying at 25,000 feet with a ground speed of 180 miles per hour, encountering a potent 90 miles per hour crosswind blowing from west to east. Bombs released at this altitude require approximately 60 seconds to travel from release to ground impact, a full minute of drift time. During this minute, the aircraft's forward momentum propels the bombs roughly 3 miles along the flight path. Concurrently, the 90 miles per hour crosswind pushes them sideways, resulting in 1.5 miles of lateral drift. Without the benefit of offset correction, aiming directly at the factory would lead to the bombs landing 1.5 miles to the east, potentially impacting whatever unsuspecting structures lay in that direction. The offset solution fundamentally inverted this equation. Rather than flying a direct course toward the factory, the aircraft would approach at a 40 to 50 degree angle from the west, positioning the wind on its left side, thereby allowing it to gently push the bomber toward the target. The bombardier would then pinpoint an offset aiming point, for instance, a specific railroad yard, located precisely where the wind would naturally carry the bombs from. He would meticulously track this railroad yard through the Norden site, input the calculated crosswind drift angle into the bomb site's computer, and initiate the release. As the bombs departed the aircraft and began their descent, the crosswind would precisely guide them from the railroad yard's trajectory toward the factory. If all calculations were accurate, the bombs would arrive at the factory's location precisely at the moment of impact. The precise measurement of wind speed became an absolutely paramount factor, and it was here that an ingenious solution emerged. Navigators began employing a technique known as the double drift method during the critical bomb run approach. This involved taking 2 distinct drift readings at separate points en route to the target, essentially quantifying the extent to which the wind was displacing the aircraft from its intended course. By meticulously comparing these 2 readings, navigators could compute the prevailing wind speed and direction with astonishing accuracy. Highly proficient navigators were capable of acquiring wind data within 5 miles per hour of the actual atmospheric conditions, a level of precision deemed entirely sufficient to ensure the efficacy of offset bombing. The resultant improvement in bombing accuracy was nothing short of extraordinary. Extensive testing conducted by the 8th Air Force in late 1943 unequivocally demonstrated that offset approaches, particularly those executed at 45-degree angles, dramatically reduced the circular error probable, CP, from a substantial 3,200 feet down to approximately 1,100 feet. This figure brought precision almost exactly in line with the 1,000-foot threshold that strategic planners had originally stipulated. Furthermore, some exceptionally skilled bombardier navigator teams were consistently achieving an impressive 800-foot accuracy on days with optimal visibility. While such figures may not seem particularly impressive when compared to modern GPS-guided munitions that can land within 15 feet, in the context of 1943 aerial warfare, this represented a truly revolutionary advancement. Crucially, it meant that bombs were now actually striking targets within the factory complex itself, rather than merely scattering across the surrounding countryside. The historical context prior to the implementation of the offset bombing technique often involved the widespread, rather than precise, impact of aerial ordnance, effectively decorating the surrounding countryside with craters instead of neutralizing specific targets. This indiscriminate scattering of munitions underscored the urgent need for a more accurate and purposeful method of aerial assault. The newly developed and highly intricate technique demanded an extraordinary degree of synchronized effort from 3 pivotal crew members: the skilled navigator, the meticulous bombardier, and the steadfast pilot. The navigator bore the critical responsibility of flawlessly executing intricate wind calculations and pinpointing the exact, predetermined offset reference point. The bombardier, in turn, was required to place absolute trust in these complex calculations, diligently tracking a reference point that, to his ingrained instincts, seemed counterintuitively distant from the actual objective. Simultaneously, the pilot had to maintain an unwavering, precise heading and altitude, even as anti-aircraft fire erupted violently around his aircraft, challenging every natural inclination to execute evasive maneuvers. Any single miscalculation or error within this delicate operational chain would immediately negate the precision, reverting the mission to the previous state of haphazard, random bombing. Consequently, the process of retraining personnel emerged as a significant impediment to widespread adoption. Bombardiers, having dedicated months to mastering the art of aiming directly at their intended targets, now faced the formidable psychological task of unlearning those deeply ingrained instincts. This mental wrestling match was akin to instructing a seasoned basketball player to focus on the backboard rather than the hoop itself, a task where the brain inherently resists every step of the new, counterintuitive instruction. To overcome this, the Army Air Forces established specialized training academies in Florida and Arizona, where flight crews meticulously practiced offset bombing runs over meticulously constructed mock German factories. They would execute these complex patterns dozens of times, relentlessly drilling until the intricate geometry of the technique became second nature, an intuitive response rather than a calculated effort. The gravity of this undertaking was further underscored by the decision to recall even veteran crews, those who had already flown numerous combat missions, back to England for this crucial retraining, a clear signal of the high-priority military leadership placed on the new methodology. By January 1944, the 8th Air Force found itself in an enviable, yet challenging, position, a predicament most organizations would eagerly embrace. They had successfully unearthed a bombing methodology that demonstrably worked with remarkable effectiveness. The immediate challenge then shifted to implementing this groundbreaking innovation across a vast operational landscape, involving approximately 12,000 personnel dispersed across 40 separate airfields throughout England, all while simultaneously engaged in the relentless pressures of active warfare. General James Doolittle, who had assumed command of the 8th Air Force that very month, meticulously reviewed the compelling offset bombing data and promptly designated its widespread adoption as his paramount training objective. He issued a formidable directive to his operations officer, Brigadier General Fred Anderson, granting him a mere 6 weeks to comprehensively retrain every bombardier and navigator serving within the theater. While Anderson's initial verbal reaction to this seemingly impossible task was reportedly unprintable, he nonetheless rose to the occasion and successfully accomplished the mission. The ambitious retraining initiative commenced strategically with the lead crews, comprising the most seasoned and proficient bombardiers and navigators, who consistently spearheaded each bombing formation. Given their pivotal role as pace-setters and guides for the entire group, their absolute mastery of the offset techniques was deemed indispensable. Dedicated training facilities were subsequently established at each bomber base, employing a comprehensive curriculum that integrated rigorous classroom instruction with extensive practical flights conducted over English coastal ranges. The theoretical sessions delved deeply into complex subjects such as wind triangles, precise drift calculations, and the intricate geometry of offset targeting, ensuring crews could execute the necessary mathematical computations even in their sleep. Following this intense academic phase, the practical flying portion began. A significant hurdle was the notoriously harsh winter weather in England, which presented exceptionally challenging practice conditions. Persistent cloud cover, unpredictable wind patterns, and severely limited daylight hours were commonplace. However, in a peculiar twist of fate, These adverse conditions proved to be a perverse advantage. If crews could successfully engage targets through the notoriously difficult English weather, they would be well prepared to handle the conditions encountered over Germany. Crews would routinely launch at dawn, navigate to designated bombing ranges situated off the coast, and meticulously execute numerous offset practice runs against floating targets or decommissioned vessels. Each crew was mandated to complete a minimum of 3 such practice missions before being officially certified for combat offset bombing, though some required as many as 10 sorties before they fully internalized the intricate feel for the precise technique. The profound effectiveness of the retraining program stemmed fundamentally from the fact that experienced combat veterans were directly instructing their fellow combat veterans. This was not merely an abstract academic exercise led by an academy instructor wielding a pointer to explain theoretical concepts. Instead, it was Lieutenant Murphy from the 305th Bomb Group, the very individual who had fortuitously stumbled upon the offset technique during the Schweinfurt mission, standing within the confines of a freezing Quonset hut, personally demonstrating his exact methodology to other bombardiers. Similarly, Captain Williams expertly conducted the navigator training segments, meticulously guiding men through his refined wind calculation methods using actual, real-world mission data. When students grappled with the inherently counterintuitive nature of aiming away from their designated targets, instructors would effectively leverage compelling strike camera footage from recent operational missions. This visual evidence starkly contrasted traditional bombing, which achieved a mere 9% accuracy, with the new offset technique, which boasted an impressive 38% accuracy. The irrefutable evidence presented through these striking comparisons was simply impossible to contest or argue against. Concurrent with the intensive training initiatives, significant revisions to operational doctrine were enacted. The 8th Air Force undertook a comprehensive overhaul of its tactical bombing manuals in February 1944, reflecting the new operational realities. Field Order 259, formally promulgated on February 20th, officially sanctioned and mandated the use of offset bombing approaches for all missions where prevailing crosswind conditions surpassed a velocity of 40 miles per hour. Furthermore, group commanders received meticulously prepared briefing packages that contained highly detailed optimal approach angles specifically tailored for every major target located within Germany. For instance, Schweinfurt had recommended approaches originating from the northeast at a 45-degree angle, while the sprawling industrial complexes of the Ruhr Valley were found to be most effectively engaged with 50-degree offsets from the west, clearly indicating extensive preparatory research and strategic analysis. Despite the meticulous planning, the initial implementation phase was not entirely seamless, encountering pockets of resistance. Older pilots, particularly those hardened veterans, who had miraculously survived the brutal campaigns of 1943, expressed considerable reluctance to abandon tactics they had literally bled to master and internalize. A widely recounted incident from March 1944 vividly illustrates this friction. A pilot from the 91st Bomb Group adamantly refused to execute an offset approach during a mission to Brunswick, instead insisting on employing the traditional straight-in attack, rationalizing his decision with the stubborn assertion that, "That's how we've always done it." His bombardier subsequently missed the target by a significant half-mile, and that pilot was discreetly, yet promptly, reassigned to non-combat duties. General Doolittle's stance on this matter was unequivocally firm: adapt to the new methodologies or be removed from operational command. By April 1944, offset bombing had been fully integrated and codified as the standard operating procedure across the 8th Air Force. Mission briefings now routinely incorporated dedicated sections for comprehensive wind analysis, where specialized meteorologists provided precise forecasts of expected wind speeds and directions at bombing altitudes. Navigators, in turn, received pre-calculated offset approach headings, meticulously derived from these anticipated wind patterns. Should meteorological conditions shift unexpectedly during the course of a mission, navigators were equipped with readily accessible lookup tables, enabling them to swiftly recalculate the necessary adjustments on the fly. This systematic integration meant that even crews of average skill could consistently achieve levels of accuracy that had previously been attainable only by exceptionally talented individuals. The efficacy of these changes manifested immediately and dramatically in the operational data. In March 1944, the overall bombing accuracy experienced a significant surge, with the average circular error probable (CP) across all 8th Air Force missions plummeting to 1,250 feet, representing a remarkable 60% improvement when compared to December 1943 figures. More critically, the percentage of bombs successfully impacting within the designated target areas climbed from a dismal 11% to a much improved 27%. While this still implied that 3/4 of the bombs failed to hit their precise mark, it nonetheless signified a genuine and revolutionary advancement in strategic bombing capability. This newfound precision translated directly into vastly improved operational efficiency, meaning industrial complexes and vital infrastructure that once necessitated a protracted series of 4 or 5 separate bombing sorties to inflict substantial damage could now be effectively neutralized or rendered inoperable after merely 2 concentrated attacks. D-Day presented the ultimate and most critical examination of the offset bombing technique, with stakes that could not possibly have been higher. On June 6, 1944, the overarching success of the entire Normandy invasion hinged precariously on the Allied bombers' capacity to decisively neutralize German coastal fortifications before the waves of troops commenced their amphibious landings on the beaches. These formidable defenses were far more than mere gun positions. They consisted of heavily reinforced concrete bunkers with walls an imposing 8 feet thick, housing powerful artillery pieces capable of shredding landing craft from distances of 3 miles offshore. Prior intelligence assessments had meticulously identified 49 major battery positions strategically distributed along a critical 50-mile stretch of coastline. The absolute neutralization of every single one of these installations was deemed imperative, as failure would inevitably result in the tragic loss of thousands of Allied soldiers in the surf. The 8th Air Force was specifically assigned the critical mission of targeting the defenses at Utah and Omaha beaches. They were granted an exceptionally narrow operational window, from 5:50 a.m. to 6:30 a.m., a mere 40 minutes to accurately deliver over 2,900 tons of bombs onto fortifications that collectively occupied an area of less than 2 square miles. The timing of this aerial assault was extraordinarily brutal, as the bombers would be operating in the dim light of dawn twilight, further complicated by a forecast of heavy cloud cover extending between 3,000 and 6,000 feet. Conventional bombing doctrine at the time unequivocally stated that accurate targeting through such cloud obscuration was impossible, but this mission was poised to rewrite that very doctrine. The innovative combination of advanced offset bombing techniques with sophisticated radar navigation aids theoretically rendered it possible to precisely strike targets that were completely invisible to the human eye. The meticulously crafted operational plan unfolded as follows. Specialized Pathfinder aircraft, each equipped with the advanced H-2X radar system, were designated to lead every bombing formation. This groundbreaking radar technology possessed the unique capability to generate a rudimentary, yet discernible, image of the coastline through dense cloud layers by detecting the distinct boundary between land and water. Navigators would then meticulously identify prominent coastal features, such as river mouths, distinctive peninsulas, and characteristic shoreline curves, and utilize these as their crucial offset reference points. The underlying mathematical principles for calculating bomb trajectory remained identical to those employed in visual offset bombing, but the input data was now derived from radar returns rather than direct optical observation. Bombardiers were tasked with diligently tracking the radar-derived reference point, meticulously calculating the precise wind drift that would carry the bombs from that specific point to the fortifications, and then executing the release. The actual execution on D-Day morning was characterized by extreme chaos and formidable challenges. The cloud cover proved to be significantly more extensive and severe than initially forecast, presenting a solid overcast layer from 2,000 feet up to 10,000 feet in many operational sectors. Consequently, bomber formations were compelled to descend to a perilous altitude of 12,000 feet to clear the worst of the meteorological conditions, thereby inadvertently placing them within effective range of any German anti-aircraft guns that had managed to survive the preceding naval bombardment. Wind conditions were equally difficult. Strong crosswinds, ranging from 25 to 40 miles per hour, originating from the northwest, actively pushed the aircraft towards the beaches. Paradoxically, this very wind, initially a challenge, ultimately became a crucial element in the bombing strategy. At Omaha Beach, the initial reports concerning the bombing outcomes were largely described as disastrous. The vast majority of bombs landed harmlessly inland, creating craters in agricultural fields and roadways well behind the primary German defensive positions. Subsequent post-invasion analyses indicated that only a meager 31% of the fortifications at Omaha sustained direct hits during the aerial assault. However, these preliminary reports crucially overlooked a vital aspect of the overall operation. In stark contrast, the offset approaches executed at Utah Beach proved to be overwhelmingly devastating for the enemy. At Utah, bombardiers expertly employed a 45-degree offset angle, initiating their approach from the northeast and effectively utilizing the prevailing crosswinds to precisely guide their ordnance towards the beach. The bombs methodically walked through the battery positions in remarkably neat lines, systematically collapsing bunkers and destroying gun emplacements with an astounding 89% effectiveness. Of the 28 primary fortifications identified at Utah Beach, an impressive 25 were successfully neutralized and rendered inoperable before a single Allied troop landed on the shore. At Utah Beach, a mere 25 enemy positions were neutralized before Allied forces commenced their landing. The fundamental disparity between the outcomes at Omaha and Utah Beaches resided entirely in the execution of their respective bombing strategies. At Omaha, bombardiers, driven by an overwhelming apprehension of inadvertently striking their own approaching landing craft, deliberately introduced a delay into their bomb release sequence. This cautious measure, holding ordnance for an additional few seconds, resulted in impact points shifting 200 to 300 yards inland from their intended targets. While the intention was undeniably noble, the consequence was catastrophic, leaving German defenses largely intact. In stark contrast, at Utah, bombardiers adhered strictly to their meticulously calculated release points, eschewing any precautionary delays. They placed their unwavering trust in the mathematical precision to ensure bombs fell clear of the beaches. This confidence was profoundly vindicated. When the 4th Infantry Division made landfall on Utah Beach at precisely 6:30 a.m., they discovered that the German positions had been comprehensively obliterated, leading to minimal enemy resistance and remarkably few casualties. The pivotal lesson derived from these operations was thoroughly documented in a classified analytical report, finalized in July 1944. This comprehensive study revealed a striking difference in efficacy. Traditional straight-in bombing approaches, even those modified at Omaha for safety considerations, achieved a mere 31% effectiveness rate. Conversely, the innovative offset approaches employed at Utah, executed precisely as trained, demonstrated an impressive 89% effectiveness. This was far from a marginal improvement. It represented the critical distinction between a technique that was barely functional and one that unequivocally secured decisive victories in combat. The report's conclusions emphatically stated that the adoption of offset bombing had dramatically reduced the number of aerial assaults required to neutralize fortified enemy emplacements by a significant factor of 3. Consequently, by the summer of 1944, virtually every major Allied bombing operation had integrated offset techniques as a foundational and primary doctrine. Illustrative examples include the sustained aerial bombardments targeting French rail yards in the prelude to the invasion, the coordinated assaults against V-1 launch sites, and the methodical dismantling of German oil production facilities, all of which routinely employed offset approaches as their standard operational procedure. The influence of this groundbreaking technique even transcended inter-service demarcations. The 9th Air Force, for instance, swiftly adopted it for their medium bombers engaged in tactical strikes. Remarkably, even RAF Bomber Command, which had previously expressed skepticism, often dismissing American claims of precision bombing as mere fantasy, began actively experimenting with offset methodologies for their own daylight strategic operations, signaling a significant shift in their tactical philosophy. This desperate, yet brilliant, innovation, which first emerged from the crucible of combat over Schweinfurt in 1943, did not merely cease with the conclusion of World War II. Instead, it profoundly reshaped the fundamental understanding and methodologies employed by humanity regarding the aerial deployment of ordnance from aircraft. Following the cessation of hostilities, as diligent analysts convened to compile the comprehensive United States Strategic Bombing Survey, they unearthed a truly astonishing revelation within the meticulously gathered data. Delving into the period spanning from January to December 1944, a time when offset bombing techniques gained widespread adoption and became universal practice throughout the 8th Air Force, the statistical evidence was compelling. During this critical year, the aggregate tonnage of bombs delivered upon German territory witnessed an extraordinary surge of 340%, concurrently with an impressive enhancement in targeting accuracy, which climbed by 190%. This potent combination signified a dual triumph: a substantial increase in the volume of ordnance deployed, coupled with a significantly higher probability of striking intended objectives. This synergistic confluence of increased firepower and enhanced precision proved instrumental in crippling German industrial production capabilities, achieving a level of disruption that the indiscriminate and less accurate bombing campaigns of the early war years had demonstrably failed to accomplish. With the advent of the Cold War, the application of offset techniques underwent a profound metamorphosis, evolving from a mere tactical expediency into a sophisticated strategic science. As the United States Air Force embarked on the complex undertaking of planning potential nuclear strikes in the 1950s, the imperative for absolute accuracy transcended operational importance to become an existential requirement. The consequences of imprecision were starkly differentiated. A conventional explosive missing its target by a mile merely represented a squandering of valuable resources, whereas a nuclear weapon veering off course by the same margin carried the catastrophic risk of obliterating an unintended urban center. Consequently, Air Force bombing academies initiated the rigorous instruction of offset geometry, elevating it to the status of fundamental doctrine, considered as critically important as mastering the basic principles of aircraft takeoff and landing. Such was the ingrained proficiency that virtually every bomber pilot serving within the Strategic Air Command was capable of calculating intricate offset angles with subconscious ease, a testament to the intensity of their training. This comprehensive instruction was predicated on the grim assumption that they would be tasked with the perilous mission of deploying atomic weapons, navigating through formidable Soviet air defenses where any deviation from offset strategies, specifically attempting traditional straight-in approaches, would unequivocally result in certain demise. As technological advancements progressed, the underlying mathematical principles of offset bombing simultaneously evolved. Upon the formidable B-52 Stratofortress's entry into active service in 1955, it was equipped with sophisticated radar bombing systems that fundamentally functioned as automated offset calculators. Specifically, the AN/ASQ-38 bombing navigation system represented a significant leap forward, possessing the remarkable capability to precisely identify radar reference points, meticulously compute wind drift, accurately determine the most advantageous offset angles, and subsequently execute the entire bombing approach with full automation. Consequently, the role of the bombardier underwent a substantial transformation, transitioning from the arduous task of manual calculation to the more refined responsibility of system supervision. Nevertheless, the enduring foundational principle remained inextricably linked to Robert Williams's serendipitous discovery, the innovative strategy of harnessing crosswind drift as an advantageous force, effectively transforming an environmental challenge into a tactical asset, rather than expending effort in futile resistance against it. The protracted conflict in Vietnam unequivocally demonstrated the efficacy of offset bombing within an altogether distinct operational milieu. The formidable monsoon winds prevalent over North Vietnam were notoriously fierce and inherently unpredictable, frequently generating meteorological conditions that surpassed in severity anything previously encountered over the European theater, including Germany. Formations of B-52s, tasked with bombing the intricate Ho Chi Minh Trail, would meticulously execute their approaches toward designated targets at precise offset angles. These angles were dynamically computed based on real-time wind measurements, diligently gathered by specialized weather reconnaissance aircraft. Despite deploying ordnance from altitudes of 30,000 feet, often through atmospheric currents that occasionally surpass velocities of 150 miles per hour, these missions consistently achieved a remarkable degree of accuracy, rendering the interdiction of the trail highly effective. Subsequent post-strike reconnaissance reports consistently confirmed that arc light missions, the operational designation for these extensive B-52 aerial assaults, recorded average circular error probables, CPs, well under 1,500 feet, a testament to their precision even amid such profoundly challenging environmental circumstances. These persistently challenging operational conditions ultimately precipitated the introduction of precision-guided munitions, PGMs, a technological leap that, at first glance, appeared to render the intricate methods of offset bombing entirely obsolete. The prevailing question became self-evident. What was the rationale for laboriously calculating complex wind triangles when one could simply deploy a laser-guided bomb, inherently capable of autonomously correcting its own flight path with remarkable precision? The First Gulf War in 1991 served as a dramatic showcase for these advanced armaments, featuring weapons so sophisticated they could reportedly navigate through narrow ventilation shafts. In the wake of this display, numerous military analysts confidently proclaimed the definitive end of the era of calculated bombing. Their conviction was firm. Sophisticated computers and global positioning systems, GPS, they asserted, would henceforth manage every aspect of aerial ordnance delivery. However, these confident prognostications proved fundamentally erroneous, primarily because their proponents overlooked the critical and evolving domain of electronic warfare. Contemporary air defense systems are no longer limited to merely engaging incoming aircraft with kinetic projectiles. They now actively disrupt GPS signals, cunningly spoof sophisticated targeting systems, and deliberately engineer electronic environments designed to degrade or nullify the guidance capabilities of precision weapons, effectively rendering them unguided once more. In scenarios where GPS functionality is compromised by jamming, military operations are thrust back to the foundational dilemma encountered in 1943. How does one effectively strike a designated target when advanced, high-technology systems cease to function reliably? The contemporary United States Air Force has, through practical necessity, rediscovered and reaffirmed the enduring solution: the principles of offset bombing. The prevailing current doctrine, specifically tailored for environments where GPS is denied or degraded, now instructs bomber crews in the critical skills of utilizing radar-identifiable geographical features as crucial offset reference points. They are trained to meticulously calculate wind drift manually, and to precisely deliver ordnance by employing intricate geometric principles, entirely bypassing reliance on satellite navigation. Even the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, widely acknowledged as the most sophisticated aircraft ever constructed, incorporates comprehensive offset bombing calculations directly into its advanced mission planning software, not merely as a contingency or backup measure, but as a primary, designated option for specific operational scenarios. When tasked with penetrating heavily defended airspace, where the activation of active targeting systems would inevitably compromise the aircraft's stealth capabilities by emitting detectable signals, passive offset techniques provide an indispensable advantage. These methods permit an attack without radiating any electromagnetic signatures. The process involves identifying suitable reference points through the use of synthetic aperture radar, then calculating the precise offset angle that strategically leverages wind drift to the bomber's advantage, enabling the release of weapons and a swift departure. The adversary, crucially, remains entirely unaware of the stealth bomber's presence until the moment the bombs commence their devastating explosions. The application of offset principles extends even into the contemporary realm of drone warfare. Operators controlling unmanned aerial vehicles such as the Reaper and Predator, particularly when contending with formidable high-altitude winds, will occasionally employ offset aiming points for their Hellfire missile attacks. While the missile's inherent guidance system adeptly manages the terminal phase of its approach, the preliminary firing solution is strategically formulated using offset geometry. This ensures the weapon is initially positioned within a reasonable proximity to its target, effectively placing it in the ballpark. This methodology offers distinct advantages. It is both swifter and more fuel-efficient compared to requiring the missile to contend with persistent crosswinds throughout the entirety of its trajectory. This remarkable technique has, in essence, completed a full circle, returning to its fundamental genesis, the compelling dynamic of desperation fostering groundbreaking innovation. Contemporary military planners, meticulously preparing for prospective conflicts against technologically advanced peer adversaries, now routinely operate under the critical assumption that global positioning system, GPS, capabilities will be either severely jammed or entirely inaccessible. Consequently, they are diligently instructing bomber crews in the intricacies of manual offset bombing with a renewed intensity and rigor that has not been witnessed since the pivotal year of 1944. Flight academies are once again incorporating the instruction of wind triangles into their curricula, and bombing ranges are actively conducting extensive practices focused on offset approach methodologies. It appears that an astute individual within the Pentagon meticulously reviewed the after-action reports from D-Day, discerning the profound truth that time-tested, conventional methods retain their efficacy and reliability precisely when modern, technologically dependent solutions prove inadequate. It is highly improbable that Robert Williams and Charles Murphy ever conceived that their unintentional navigational miscalculation would continue to exert a profound influence on military engagements and strategies some 8 decades later. Yet, this enduring impact exemplifies the very essence of genuine innovation. It addresses an immediate and pressing challenge with such ingenious simplicity and effectiveness that its solution becomes an indelible and permanent fixture. The technique of deploying bombs laterally, thereby allowing natural wind forces to significantly contribute to their trajectory, was far more than a mere tactical stratagem devised during World War II. It represented a foundational revelation in the realms of physics and geometry. More profoundly, it unveiled a novel methodology for transmogrifying inherent environmental conditions into potent instruments of warfare. Indeed, every precision strike executed across the globe today, irrespective of whether it is guided by advanced GPS technology or meticulously calculated through manual methods, bears an undeniable legacy connected to that perplexing October morning over Schweinfurt, when an individual, in aiming at an incorrect target, inadvertently achieved a perfectly accurate strike.